Hello! I'm making this video directly inspired by the good man himself, Michael K. Vaughn, who makes great videos, great content. Love his channel dearly. And he did a video recently that was his favorite horror movies of the 20th century, and then he did a second video that was his favorite horror movies of the 21st century. And I thought I would do the 21st century first. No particular reason, I guess, just because I saw that video today and it inspired me. Spoilers for his list, he picked his number one, with a caveat saying that he didn't think everybody would necessarily consider it a horror movie, but he picked Mulholland Drive as his number one. I am going to take the stance that I don't think of that as a horror movie. I think of it more in the line of like a thriller, psychological thriller, mystery, sort of like an early, like The Game, the David Fincher movie, but like, you know, obviously it's Lynch, so it's not very straightforward like The Game would be. It's got horror elements, but that's all to say that if I did think of that as a horror movie, I would also have that as my number one pick. Absolutely, that is like a top 5 all-time favorite movie of mine. That's an amazing movie, and you should absolutely watch it, even though I don't think it's a horror movie. But my list, I drafted up a top 10. It was hard. There were some tough things that had to get cut and left on the cutting room floor. And I think that this list is not necessarily going to be a definitive list. There's going to be a lot of very popular and very acclaimed and loved movies that are not on this list that are very good, but just aren't, for me personally, top 10 worthy. Things like Get Out or Midsommar are fantastic movies that I love dearly, but just are not top 10 horror movies of the last 21 years for me personally. So, but they are absolutely worth your time. Anyways, that's enough rambling. Let's get into the list. My number 10 pick is probably going to be the most controversial pick on this list. It's a movie that I think, like Mulholland Drive, a lot of people would not think of as a horror movie, but I think it's a horror movie. I think it's absolutely a horror movie, and that is Trash Humpers, the film by Harmony Korine. Another reason that this is a controversial pick is because most people haven't seen this movie, and most of the people who have seen this movie hate it. It is not a very well-liked movie. Most people think that it is dumb and pretentious and try-hard, and that people who like it are pretentious tryhards. And I don't fault them for feeling that way. It is a movie that almost defies you to enjoy it. And it is very weird. One of the weirdest movies ever made. So Harmony Korine, for a brief backstory, when he was 19 years old, he was like a New York City street kid, skateboarder, drug addict, and he wrote a script for a movie. And then he met a man, Larry Clark, who befriended him, who was a director, and Larry Clark made his script into a movie, and that movie was called Kids, which was a very, very controversial, upsetting movie. Caused somewhat of a minor moral panic. It's a movie about young people, children, like under the age of 18, children who basically just do drugs and have sex and get AIDS, and get lots of AIDS, and it is very unpleasant. It's an unpleasant movie. And then after that success, Harmony was able to kind of leverage that into directing, and he started directing his own features. His first feature, which he directed when he was like 22, 23, is called Gummo, which a lot of people put up as like one of the most disturbing, weird movies ever made. Very plotless sort of series of vignettes that all center around poor people in this town in rural Ohio. Very good movie. Very, very good movie. Then he followed that up with a movie called Julian Donkey Boy, which was the first American movie made using the Dogma 95 manifesto, which was created by a number of European filmmakers, most prominently Lars von Trier, which was sort of a manifesto for making realistic movies that are low budget and using like as little frills as possible, basically. And so Julian Donkey Boy was about a schizophrenic man and his sister who's pregnant and his abusive father. The sister is played by Chloe Sevigny. The father is played by Werner Herzog. And then when he finally came back again with a movie, it was a kind of a long break. It was like 8 or 9 years. He came back with a movie called Mr. Lonely, which was a much higher budget movie. It was like a $10 million budget. And it was about a Michael Jackson impersonator who stumbles upon this commune of people who live as celebrity impersonators in this sort of cult. And it was not a very successful movie, and he had a lot of trouble making it and dealing with all of the sort of red tape and politicking that comes with a higher budget and studio and things like that. And so in response to that, he decided he's going to make like the least commercial, least expensive movie that he possibly could. And that movie ended up being Trash Humpers. Trash Humpers was filmed on commercial-grade VHS camcorders using used tapes that already had stuff on it that they taped over, so there's like artifacting and stuff. And then it was edited using 2 VCRs. And it concerns a group of people, elderly people, that are played by Corinne and his wife, Rachel Corinne, and then a couple of other people wearing old people prosthetics, masks. And it is largely plotless and vignette-like in the way that Gummo is, but even more plotless, I would say. And so it opens with this sort of series of images of these old people humping and masturbating on trash, piles of trash, trash cans, and then they wander around Nashville where the movie was shot. And basically how they made this movie was that these guys all actually put this makeup on, and then they all themselves ran the camera, filmed the movie themselves, and it had like very little in the way of like plot or script or anything. And then they lived basically homeless. They like slept outside and just sort of like filmed everything they did for like 2 weeks and then cobbled all of that footage together into this movie. Some of the like memorable scenes, there's like a lot of scenes of them breaking stuff in parking lots. There's a scene where they like go into these guys' house and like force them to eat pancakes with dish soap on them, like instead of syrup. There's like repeated themes or like them sort of like peer pressuring strangers into doing things and screaming. And there is some murder, and there's one dude who's constantly going, make it, don't fake it, make it, don't fake it. You'll have that in your brain forever if you see this movie. And it is I think it's a horror movie. It's a horrifying movie with weird, horrific things. And it, I don't necessarily know for sure what it's supposed to like be about, right? Because it's got to be like a metaphor for something, right? There's definitely like elements of like societal decay and things like that, but it's just so evocative. It's like a fine art piece. It's like something you would go and see at a museum, and there's nothing else like it. It is singular and uncompromising, and most people will hate it. But if it sounds intriguing to you, I suggest you take it upon yourself to track yourself down a copy. There are DVDs of it out there. It's not on any streaming services, I don't believe. But it's worth your time, I think, personally. My second movie, Korean cinema has had a lot of eyes on it in the last couple years. First with Parasite winning the Oscar, and then now, much more recently, we've got Squid Game on Netflix. And people are like, oh, Korean cinema is good. And I've been a huge fan of Korean cinema for a long time, ever since I first saw Oldboy back when I was in high school, maybe around like 2005 or so. But Oldboy is not a horror movie. I would categorize that also as like a thriller mystery movie. There are horrific things in it, but you know what is a horror movie is I Saw the Devil. I Saw the Devil came out in 2010, and the star of Oldboy, Choi Min-sik, is the villain of this movie, I Saw the Devil. He's a fantastic actor. Fantastic actor. So basically, the story of this movie is about a young man who is a police officer. His fiance is murdered by a serial killer, played by Choi Min-sik. And it's a revenge movie, basically. He figures out and tracks down the killer, figures out who he is, and using his police skills. But then instead of bringing him to conventional justice, he decides to take a personal act of revenge, which involves him kidnapping him, torturing him, doing awful things to him, and then releasing him, making him think that he has escaped, only for him to capture him again and just repeat the process over and over. And it is just a horrible, nightmarish descent into depravity, where you see a man lose himself and become a monster, and then you also see this monster be treated so badly that you learn to sympathize for him. It's very weird and interesting and fascinating, fantastically made movie. It's very long. It's like 2.5 hours long, and it really makes the most out of its runtime, I have to say. And it's directed by a man named Kim Ji-woon, who is a very, well-regarded, very famous Korean director. He has made some of his more famous movies. Include A Tale of Two Sisters, which is a very good horror movie as well. The Good, the Bad, and the Weird, which was a very sort of bonkers take on the spaghetti western. And then after I Saw the Devil, he made his first American movie, which was The Last Stand, which you may remember as the big sort of return to film for Arnold Schwarzenegger after he ended his tenure as governor of the state of California. But yeah, I Saw the Devil, I think, is his best movie, and it's one of my favorite Korean movies, and is very much worth your time. It used to be on Netflix. I don't know where it is anymore, but check it out. Number 8 is a movie that caused a big stir when it came out a couple years ago. It's Mandy. Mandy by Panos Cosmatos, starring the uncompromising Nicolas Cage. So Panos Cosmatos is this guy. He's made 2 movies, this and the movie called Beyond the Black Rainbow, which is also a very good movie. And he makes these movies that have roots in genre cinema, horror cinema, things like that, but he has this very intensely surreal eye to his visuals. His movies are very dreamlike and loose, which isn't to say that they don't have plots or anything like that. They just feel very dreamlike, not quite in a Lynchian way, but almost. And this is no exception. This is a revenge movie. At its core, it concerns a man named Red who is married to a woman named Mandy. He's a logger. They live in the woods in the Pacific Northwest. And one day, this man, Jeremiah Sands, who's the leader of this sort of New Age Christian cult, sees Mandy and decides that he wants her for his like harem of women that he has, but when she rejects him, he kills her. Is the sort of setup of the movie, and then the rest of the movie is Nicolas Cage's insane revenge. Because like a normal man, Nicolas Cage forges a giant battle axe in the fire to murder everyone. There's also a part where they use a conch shell to summon a bunch of leather daddies that look like Cenobites that ride four-wheelers. There's also a part where a man has a knife penis and is murdered with it, and then Nicolas Cage does cocaine off of the knife penis. It is a great movie in every measurable way. There's the second best chainsaw duel in film history in this movie. The number one, of course, being Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 by Tobe Hooper. But this movie is like everything that I want in a movie. I remember going to see this movie in the theater and just being like absolutely riveted, and I loved it. It was a lovely movie, and you can watch it on Shudder if you have Shudder. Shudder is very cheap. It's like $6 a month, so you should get Shudder. It's worth your time. Number 7 is another movie that is probably going to be a bit controversial. It's a movie by a man who has, a number of well-known movies, and this is maybe like a tier in terms of its being known below his best-known movies, and his most loved movies. But I like it more than a different movie that I could have picked for this list, Itchy the Killer. And I even like it more than a movie that wouldn't have been on this list because it came out in the 90s, Audition. And so, of course, I'm talking about Takashi Miike, the legendary and extremely prolific Japanese filmmaker. And I'm talking about his film Visitor Q, which is a movie that winds up on a lot of lists of most disturbing, grossest, most upsetting movies ever made. It was the result of a film series called the Love Cinema series, which were all direct-to-video movies made by independent filmmakers that were meant to showcase the ability of digital video as a medium. So this was made in 2001 when digital video was still pretty new, and it was shot on, like a commercial-grade digital video camcorder, similar to David Lynch's Inland Empire, also shot on a commercial-grade digital video camera. So it looks, it doesn't look great. It looks like it's shot on video, right? But that's okay. I think it adds to the tone of the movie. And it concerns this family, and the family, let's just say, is pretty fucked up. It opens with this dad going to visit his daughter, who is a prostitute and a sex worker, and she basically is like, you fucked my life up, do you want to have sex with me? And she basically convinces him to have sex with her, pay her to have sex with her. So that's how the movie opens. There's scenes of, like, the family members beating each other. The son is, like, constantly mocked at school, and so the other students come and shoot fireworks into their house while they're trying to have dinner. That's a very memorable scene. The mother is a heroin addict. The son beats the mother, like, repeatedly. There's just, like, a lot happening. There's a point where the father rapes a woman and then chokes her to death and then brings her body back to their house and hides it in the greenhouse in their yard, and then has sex with the dead body, and then the dead body shits on him, and it's all like played for laughs, kinda. Like, all of this movie is like a little bit played for laughs. It's not taking this very extreme, disturbing content very seriously, I would say. There's also a number of scenes near the end of the mother is just like repeatedly squeezing her breast milk, her breasts, making her breast milk come out. Like, so much breast milk in this movie. I can't think of another movie that has breast milk in it, and this one it will probably always have the most. There's a lot. Like, pooling on the floor. It's a lot. You know, and so, like, this movie, you know, I think it's an interesting, because tonally it's very weird. It's very dark. It's a very dark comedy, I would call it, but it's definitely horror, because it's dealing with very horrific things that do happen and are real. I think that it's largely like a sort of, you know, critique on, you know, home life, family structure, sort of a satire of that, and then also sort of a look at poverty and class and generational trauma and abuse. And so, you know, I think it has serious things to say. It's just doing a lot of it in a very lighthearted, humorous way that maybe a lot of people would probably be upset by. I think this movie would upset most people. But I really like it a lot, so I'm putting it on my list. Number 6, we have the most recent film by Lars von Trier. It is The House That Jack Built, starring Matt Dillon. I am a big fan of Lars von Trier. I know that he is a problematic person, and he makes problematic movies. A lot has been said about how he really seems to like making movies about women who are treated badly, and what that says about him. Most of his movies are about a main character who is a woman who has terrible things happen to her. Breaking the Waves fits that description. Dogville and Manderley, Antichrist, Melancholia, Nymphomaniac, they all fit that description. This movie, The House That Jack Built, the main character is a man, Jack, played by Matt Dillon, and he is a serial killer. He's a misogynist to the most extreme degree, a man who hates women so much that he kills them. He doesn't exclusively kill women, and he does make a point of that in the movie to talk about that. And it's very clear that Jack is a sort of author surrogate for Lars von Trier, and in this movie he is sort of psychoanalyzing himself and asking himself, why do I do this? Why is this what I like to do? Right? Because I think he recognizes that it's wrong. So, the framework of the movie is that Jack, the serial killer, is basically going on a recreation of the Divine Comedy by Dante. He is descending through the layers of hell, being guided by the poet Virgil, or Verge, as he calls him. And during their travels through the underworld, he recounts to Virgil a number of episodes from his life, a number of murders that he has committed throughout his life. They are not necessarily told in order of importance or chronology. And the movie is a dark comedy, I would say. There are a number of scenes that are very clearly intentionally meant to be funny, sort of like a comedy of errors of him trying to dispose of bodies after he murders them and things. And so Jack is an extremely unreliable narrator. The entire movie is being presented as him telling the stories of his conquests and stuff. But it grows into this sort of epic examination of von Trier himself, to the point where there's even a section where there's a montage of footage from his previous movies just inserted into the movie during a section where Jack is monologuing his sort of philosophies about art. Because Jack is the title refers to the fact that Jack considers himself an artist. He is a architect who has been trying to build a house for his entire life, but he struggles with perfectionism, and he constantly tears the house down before he can finishes it. And he also considers his murder to be a kind of art, and he will like pose the bodies and take photographs of them, and etc., etc. So this is not a very traditional horror movie. It's got the framework of a serial killer story, but I don't think it's a very traditional movie. It's also very long. It's like over 2.5 hours long. It also, for a long time, you couldn't get the uncut version of it in America because they had to cut it down to get it in R because it's pretty extreme. It features some pretty graphic murders of children in it, fair warning, and some pretty gnarly animal mutilation that's not real, but it's pretty gnarly. But they did release, for one night only, they released the uncut version in theaters, like a week before the wide release of the R-rated version, but that caused some sort of issue with the rules of the MPAA about like how you can release different versions of movies in proximity to each other. Very stupid and arbitrary. But because of that, the uncut version of the movie wasn't available in America for a couple years. And it has become available now, and I do recommend that you get the uncut version. That's the intended, preferred version of the director. So, yeah. And I would also say that if you haven't ever seen a von Trier movie before, maybe skip this one until you've seen some of his other stuff, because I think that having the knowledge of his back catalog will help you appreciate the movie more. Number 5, we have Robert Eggers' The Lighthouse. I think that, this is not as explicitly of a horror movie as his previous film, The Witch, was, but I think it is a horror movie, and I think it is a better movie than The Witch, personally. It concerns a young man who becomes a lighthouse attendant, played by Robert Pattinson, and he joins and is partners in this venture with an older man played by Willem Dafoe. And as he spends time on this remote island, this is taking place in the late 19th century, I believe. And as he spends time isolated on this island with this fucking weirdo, played by Willem Dafoe, he sort of starts to slowly lose his grip on reality. He has these sexual fantasies about mermaids that are starting to become more and more vivid and real. There's also a fair warning, there's a part in this movie where he kills a seagull in like the most awful way that you could. It's pretty gnarly. Again, not real, but if you don't like seeing animals get hurt, that's gonna be a tough scene because it's very long and very gnarly. This is a very popular and well-loved movie. I don't feel like I have a ton to say about it that hasn't been said already. But it is a great psychological horror movie. Yeah. Number 4, we have Titan by Julie Ducournau. Wait, you say, Rowan, this movie came out last week. And I'm here to say, yes, it did. And yes, it is this good. It won the Palme d'Or, the top prize at the Cannes Film Festival this year. Second time in the history of the Cannes that a woman has won the Palme, which is pretty embarrassing, I have to say. It's not like women don't make good movies. And so this is Ducournau's second film. Her first film, Raw, came out about 4 years ago. Was very well liked, well received, film about cannibalism, and I liked that movie. I didn't love that movie, but this movie, holy shit! I will say that the general consensus was know as little about this movie as you can going in. I think that's a good piece of advice, and so I took it. And so I will tell you what I knew going in, which was the one-line summary on IMDb, which was a woman has sex with a car and gets pregnant. If you want, you could definitely watch the trailer for this movie. It's a very well-made trailer that tells you nothing about the movie. It gives you a good idea of the sort of vibe of the movie, the visual style of the movie, but tells you nothing about the plot, which is an interesting way to cut a trailer. I will say that this movie has a lot of disturbing and gross stuff in it. It is a body horror movie at its core, so if that's not your jam, this won't be your jam. It has some of the best performances I've seen in a movie in a very long time. And it's just a treasure. It's just incredible. I cannot wait to watch this movie again. I saw it at the Alamo Draft House this previous Sunday, so like 6 days ago. And I just haven't been able to get it out of my mind since. I don't know. I between this and the film Pig with Nicolas Cage, which also came out this year, I'm not sure which one is my favorite movie of the year so far. Both of them really like blew me away. I think Pig might edge it out a little bit. That movie like really fucked me up and like shook me to my core in a way that a movie hadn't in a very long time, especially a new movie. But that's not a horror movie. And Titan is just otherworldly. It feels like I walked away from that movie being like, I can't believe that this movie was made, like that people gave money to make this movie, but I love the fact that I live in a world where it's allowed to exist. So that's my review. Number 3 is the debut film from Ari Aster, Hereditary. This is one of the biggest, most loved horror movies of the last few years. And then, of course, he followed it up just a year later with Midsommar, which people might love more. And I love Midsommar a lot, but I do like Hereditary more. I think that there is something to be said about the fact that I'm a guy, and maybe the story in Midsommar is a very female story, a story about how women are treated, which is great and important, but maybe doesn't resonate on a very on a guttural level with me because I'm not a woman. But the story of Hereditary is a story about mental illness, and that's something that I definitely can relate to. And again, this is a movie I think that it is better if you know as little about it as possible. But I will tell you that it is about a family. The parents are played by Gabriel Byrne and Toni Collette, two of, the great, for my money, two of the greatest living actors. Gabriel Byrne, I think, gets forgotten about a lot, but he is just a powerhouse. Like, every time he's in a movie, he steals the show. And Toni Collette is an amazing actress. Similarly, every time she's in a movie, it's like an indication of quality. Like, if these people are in a movie, it's going to be a good movie. And then the children are of course played by Alex Wolff, who has gone on to be a bit more popular, and in the years since he was in he was in Pig. Actually, he's sort of the second lead in Pig, and he's in the Jumanji movies, and he was in Old, the new M. Night Shyamalan movie, amongst other things. And then the daughter is played by a girl, Millie Shapiro, who hasn't done much else, but she is incredible in this movie, and is sort of best known for being a very distinct looking person, which always, plays well in horror. I think very distinct looking people always do well in horror. And so basically the grandmother of this family passes away, and then afterwards there's sort of conspiracy, and things start to unravel and be revealed, and the Toni Collette, the mother, starting to maybe lose her grip on reality a little bit, in a way that maybe her mother also had before. And it's about how mental health passes through families. The title Hereditary is a direct reference to that, but that's more of a metaphor. What it's explicitly about, I'm not going to tell you, because I think it's going to be much more fun if you find out by watching it yourself. Just suffice it to say that this is like one of the most acclaimed horror movies of all time, particularly in the last few years, and it's pretty much universally loved, and I have nothing bad to say about it, so watch it. My number 2 film is another film by Lars von Trier, and like I said, I love Lars von Trier, and it is Antichrist. This is a pretty buck wild movie. It is available. Criterion put it out on physical, and I think it's streaming on the Criterion channel. So it is a movie really only featuring 2 people, Willem Dafoe and Charlotte Gainsbourg, both frequent players in von Trier's movies, playing characters he and she. And so in the opening of the film is very explicit, by the way, and features the opening scene featuring the 2 of them having sex, which featured unsimulated sex, but it's like porn actor body doubles for the sex scenes, but it is real sex, so be warned, don't watch this with your parents or your kids. And while they're having sex, their toddler falls out of the window and dies. And so in the wake of this, in their grief, Willem Dafoe, is a psychologist, and she is an artist. And he decides, against the recommendations of convention and everything, to take her on as a patient, to try and help her grieve. And part of this process, they go to a cabin in the woods to try and heal, and she wants to work on art. But she becomes sort of obsessed with this idea that women are evil, and starts working on this sort of historiography project about art through the ages, about how women are evil, and then becomes increasingly convinced that she is evil, and then things just sort of spiral out of control from there, and it becomes a pretty a weird take on a pretty traditional sort of horror story. It's got some pretty gnarly shit in it. I remember seeing this movie in the theater when it came out, just after I finished high school, with a bunch of my friends, and we all were just like blown away by it. I think it's problematic in a lot of ways, in the ways that it deals with women, but I think that it's problematic in a way that invites you to question it and to talk about its ideas and to think about the way that we are complicit in the things that it presents, which is what great art should do. Incredible performances, just visually one of the most beautiful movies ever. Great. And my number 1 pick for favorite horror movies of the 21st century is one of the most notorious pieces of a cinematic movement that the critics have dubbed New French extremism. It is Pascal Laguierre's Martyrs from the year 2008. This movie was remade in America a few years later. Do not watch the remake. The remake is not good. The original is very good and very intense. It's one of the most intense, extreme, disturbing movies that you will see in your life. I remember watching it, and for the first time, I was laying on my couch, and not the opening scene, but like the second sort of scene of the movie, some pretty crazy shit happens, and I remember like immediately sitting up because I was like, okay, I cannot be like reclined watching this movie. It is too much. It is too intense. This movie is not going to be for everyone. Absolutely. It is very graphic and very upsetting and very sad and very weird, and a lot of people will not have a good time watching this movie. But I love it very dearly, and it is a movie about victimhood and about, reclaiming yourself after you are a victim and have been abused. It's also about transcendence and how pain and terrible things can allow us to transcend ourselves. Very interesting philosophy behind this movie. I'm again not going to tell you very much about it because I think it's better if you just find out yourself, because there are a number of twists in this movie that I don't want to spoil. But basically it opens with this young girl who has been kidnapped and tortured, and she manages to escape. And then, 10 years later or so, she believes that she has found the people who are responsible and brings her friend along to go and confront them. And that is the sort of setup for the movie. And that's it. That's my list. I hope that you track some of these down and watch them because they're all excellent and worth your time. Thanks for watching. I'm going to film another video right after this, so that's going to be fun. We'll have 2 videos, and yeah, thanks for sticking around. Have a good night.